B, action, C, modern dance. Shall I repeat? No, they're just translated. Repeat. Bapak says, don't use wishful thinking. Express yourself in A, work, B, action, C, modern dance. You say A, work, and you agree, incorrectly. Bapak said, express yourself in action. Okay, again. Bapak says, when men and women blank together, souls may choose different mates. And that is when men and women A, walk together, B, exercise together, C, rumba together. When men and women A, walk together, souls may choose different mates. When men and women exercise together, souls may choose different mates. When men and women rumba together, souls may choose different mates. A, B, or C. We say A, walk together, and is this true or not true? Mates. That's the answer we have to deal with. You say that's false, you say that correctly. It is being exercised together. Okay, so that's the round. You win. Thank you, and for our last and final round, may we have 2 more contestants, please. Just find yourself and come on up. 2 people. 2 people. Don't make us go at you. Here's one, thank you. And a man. Oh, come on up. Okay. Very good. Okay, this is the last round. Circle or square? Give me a circle. Okay. Shall we let you go first? Just give me a second. Say your names, please.
My name is Fardia.
Fardia and?
Robin Good.
Robin. Okay. Robin, who do you... No, I'm saying, sorry. Fardia, who do you choose for first? Ruana. Okay. Bapak says, if man had the power to find God, this world would become even more A, beautiful, B, spiritual, C, ruined. You say C, ruined, and is this true or false? Yeah, the whole sentence is, if man had the power to find God, this world would become even more A, beautiful, B, spiritual, C, ruined. You say it's false, and you're wrong. Bapak did say this world would become even more ruined. So Robin, who do you choose? Virginia, you're on. Bapak says, God teaches man with a quickening vibration which purifies, after which comes A, spiritual cleansing, B, spiritual knowledge, C, a cigarette. B, after which comes spiritual knowledge. True or false? True, and true it is. Ibuyati again. If God did not work, the planets would crash into each other and there would be A, an end to the world, B, an end to the universe, or C, a big mess to clean up. Be an end to the universe. True or false? True, not really. Bapak said if God did not work, the planets would crash into each other and there would be an end to the world. Robin earns the square to win, and we got weekend. That's the hot shot. Bapak says, the meaning of enterprise is the use of the heart and mind, A, to develop what God gave us, B, for our lives in this world, or C, to acquire a Mercedes-Benz. The meaning of enterprise is the use of the heart and mind, A, to develop what God gave us, B, for our lives in this world, C, to acquire a Mercedes-Benz. B, for our lives in this world. And you say true or false? You say true, it is true. That's it. That's all we have time for tonight. A big hand for our players. A big hand for our contestants. Every player receives Bapak says game. Thank you for playing. Everybody, a big round of applause for our players. Thank you very much. There's a lot more show. Let me tell you what we have. We have the raffle, of course. We would now like to present, ladies and gentlemen, a man who knocked them dead at the Opera House at Sydney Harbor 3 days ago. Hamilton Cheifetz, world-class, world-noted, world-famous cellist, is going to play two very bright and lively numbers. Let's bring him on with a big Congress welcome, Hamilton Cheifetz.
The first number I'm playing is a G in C major, Del Gaucho by Ennio Bolognini. I just wanted to thank very much all my brothers and sisters here for supporting all of the performers for the last week. It meant a great deal to all of us, and particularly Ismail Meyerson for an incredible amount of work. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
ancient Irish instrument, and Edward Wheeler, who plays the didgeridoo, which is the Aboriginal instrument that is timeless. It was here when we convicts got here. Are playing together, not only them for the first time, but this is the first time these two ancient instruments have ever been played together in the world, ever. So it is not only entertaining, but it is also historical. Historical. Hysterical. The uilleann pipes and the didgeridoo. Edward and Dirk. More pipes. Microphone, more pipes.
It's fine, man.
Where's it coming out of? It comes out of everywhere. Okay.
crow, searching for mussels along the beach. Finding one, he tried to open it, but for the life of him, he could not. A brother crow, seeing this, said, "Ah! You're doing it all wrong." Yeah. Because if I were you, I'd take that there mussel, bring it up oh, about 10,000 feet, and drop it down on these here rocks. Yeah.
Sound effects band. Alright, well, we're supposed to be out of here at midnight, but we're not going anywhere until this show is over. Is that okay with everybody? Alright, we still do have the raffle, and our next act is a lovely lady from Los Angeles. Her name is Paula Mastanovich. She'll be accompanied by the Ike Isaacs Trio. And the first number is on tape. The first number is a Neapolitan song called Tukanun Chiam. Yeah. Paula Mastanovich.
I will give you translation, a short translation. It speaks about mountains being covered with the sheets of moonlight, and there is a calm and beauty that I never saw before. And I'm alone, everything sleep or is dying, only I am vigilant because my love is burning in me. And where are you now? You don't cry, but you make me cry. Where are you now? I love you. I love you. And something else. I love you, and these eyes would like to see you again.
Yeah.
you very much. What?
Benefit concert. Okay, if you want to hear more of me and this wonderful group of musicians, we're doing a benefit concert on Sunday after the plenary session around 1 o'clock here. Tickets will be on sale. And the fundraising will be for Susila Dharma Indonesia and Sika. So we have a full program.
Splendid. We'll see you after. Thank you. Very good. Now there's a birthday. Who has a birthday? Galiana? Galiani? Galiani. Did I say it right yet? Galiani. It's Galiani's birthday. We're going to sing you a very quick chorus of Happy Birthday in... You're rapping in Z. Well, I'll do it. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy
Rosanna Ditmars.
Take you back a few decades here. Song by Joni Mitchell. You may have heard it last week, but we thought we'd do it again for those of you who missed it. Is this mic on? Okay. Child of God, he was walking along the road, and I asked him, where are you going? He told me, I'm going on down to Yasu's farm. I'm gonna join in a rock and roll band. I'm gonna camp out on the land. I'm trying to keep my soul free. Back to the garden. Can I walk beside you? I have come here to lose the snow, and I feel to be a journey. Well, maybe time of year, or maybe it's the time of man. I don't know who I am, but life is funny. We got stardust, million-year-old carbon. We got golden, caught in the devil's bargain. And we got to get ourselves back to the garden. By the time we got to Woodstock, we were 500,000 strong, and everywhere was silent celebration. Shotgun through the sky, and they were turning into butterflies across our nation. We got stardust, million-year-old carbon. We got golden, caught in the devil's bargain, and we got to ourselves back to the garden.
Sing-along, which we will do right after the raffle, which is immediately next. We're going to do the raffle now. So, if you will, can I sing along? There will be song sheets passed out among you. We invite you to come forward to the front for the sing-along. If you can get a couple people to help you pass them out. We are closing with this sing-along. And we want to thank everyone who's in the show tonight, and thank you for your endurance and your convergence. And you can give yourselves a great big hand for being here. Thank you all.
Yeah, Lorenzo!
And let us have a round of applause for Henrietta and Lorenzo Music. They did fantastic job.
Okay, so get your song sheets and we'll close with the sing-along. Rachman, the stage is yours. And I want to announce that the Subud youth video will be shown at the back in the back tent by the clothing the tie-dye place. The Subud youth video of all the Subud youth camps in California right after this. And I understand the Indonesian store is still open. So thank you for staying. Rachman, take it.
How many people want to sing?
I want to sing!
Everybody wants to sing. Come up a little closer.
Is everybody still awake?
How about if we do it tomorrow night instead?
What about just one chorus of Amazing Grace? Together in harmony?
Let's close with Amazing Grace and we'll do the sing-along tomorrow night. Okay? Okay. It's all yours.
God love you, babe. God love you. Amazing Grace, I tell you. Nothing like it.
Cheers, right?
Cheers, mate. Rachman did a great job filming. Great job singing. Hell of a night. Never be another one like it. Congress is going to be over in another few days. All these people won't be together for another 5 years. God love you. Amen, brothers and sisters. Should I press the red button?
Green button in there. There it is. Seems to be some sort of a secret
I don't think either locally or even nationally.
organizational meeting.
Perhaps international. That is another good suggestion.
As far as catalogs go, ever since the New Girl, I've kept a file of doing catalogs, and I've done research, and I've Xerox pages of other catalogs, and bought other catalogs, and it's something that I have up in my bedroom here. I have a file this thick of stuff about doing catalogs, but until I get to a point where I feel that there's a way to do one that will really be useful to everyone, and one of the first ones I do think of would be a catalog that would go to architects for artists that wanted to do public art. But until, I still don't feel like I'm at that point. But that is why I've gotten into publishing. Like I said, I did this guidebook to art galleries and museums in Washington. And now I'm working with a Subud partner on one in Florida. And I also, at this Congress, made a connection with the person who's going to do the writer's newsletter. And is going to be in touch with all the writers. And we're talking about setting up a publishing enterprise to publish books that can bring the writing people and the visual arts people in Subud together. But initially we're going to do another one of these books about the Bay Area of San Francisco. I want to do a restaurant book about guide to Florida. I want to do a guide to very unusual, unique, oddball hotels in the United States. So if anyone knows of any real oddball hotels, write me about them.
They're all
But
in California.
ultimately, I see wanting to get into art and artist postcards I could work on right now, because postcards are so simple. I want to do calendars, but calendars are so expensive to do. I've investigated, and it's terribly, terribly expensive. I want to do artist books, like books of, like the series that you did, or the series that Louise Rudloff did, of working through your a life journey kind of books. I'd like to do books like that, and she wants to do books of poetry and writing and children's books and things, and I can see how you can connect artists for that. You can connect the visual artist with the writer to do a children's book, but a lot of it's far away. Right now I'm only going to do the books I've already done and know how to do. But if people have publishing ideas, especially if they have publishing ideas that they think are real feasible right now, anyone who has them, let me know, because I seem to be pushed into this direction that I actually am not really, I'd really much rather just make sculpture. I don't really want to publish books, but I feel like God keeps pushing me into this direction.
God keeps publishing you.
That I'm stuck in here for a while.
Lorena, Harris Madden was telling me that CDT is the interesting concept of creating hotels.
Did you hear about the hotel in Oregon that has each room is like this Edgar Allan Poe
This
room?
one, I already have that one down. Someone in Oregon sent me who knows I want to do this, sent me a whole package of...
Yeah, there's also an Edmund.
I guess the first thing would be just if you could say your name and give a little bit of background, maybe how long you've been in Subud, how you came here.
Well, I'm Rachman Mitchell, and I was at Coombe Springs when Bapak first came to England, and I first heard about Bapak from John Bennett, and in one of his morning groups, young people, and he said there was someone coming from the east who would alter, change the direction of our work, as it was called. Work for oneself was the name of the Goethe system. And at that time I didn't know that Bennett himself had been following latihan for 4 or 5 months himself, together with 2 or 3 other people in Goju. And at the same time he had been doing a sort of morning relaxation exercise with a number of us in Coombe Springs. And about 2 or 3 nights after 2 or 3 days later, after he'd spoken to us about this, I was suddenly awakened at about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. And not just kind of like waking up, but really awake inside, in a way I never felt woken before. And I didn't open my eyes. And I suddenly became aware of a very bright light that seemed to be kind of open over the open window just above there. I was sleeping in a room that faced on the garden. It was a simple kind of little cottage. And I was aware of this light, and then suddenly the light kind of entered into my head and then moved into my body and was accompanied by a very deep feeling of joy and bliss. And I heard my own voice speaking to me and saying that I should follow the one who was coming, who had been spoken about, and should try and follow his advice and so on. And I don't know how long the experience was, but then it went. And I didn't tell anyone about this experience at all. My life was in some confusion at that time. I'd fallen in love with a girl and I couldn't, she was far away and I couldn't visit her, and I had my exams to take. A lot of things had kind of, after that I'd fallen in love with someone who was married. And life was very sort of somewhat confusing. Anyhow, six weeks later, Papa came to Coombe Springs, and I was appointed to be one of the waiters to wait on supper for his family. Ismana and Rahayu and some others as well. And shortly after that I was opened. And for me, one of the proofs, of course, of the latihan at that time was within a short time, I'd fallen out of love with this married woman, who was married to a friend of mine. And that was one of the things. Just suddenly I looked at her and she looked at me, and bang, everything was clear. The second thing that was a kind of proof to me of the latihan was that since the age of 12, when my father died, there had remained a kind of black mass in me of sadness and depression. And at that, sometime after this experience and after I was open, I was suddenly aware of my father just sitting beside me. And it was absolutely clear that the reality of his being was there. So all my doubts as about the reality of the next world was kind of was put to rest. The third thing that happened was that my dependence on John Bennett as a teacher suddenly just completely went. And I think this may have been about 6 months after it was over. Just remember that in the Gurdjieff work, your teacher was someone who required the utmost obedience and respect from one. And John Bennett was speaking at one of these meetings and saying that we must remember all the truth, what we'd learned in the past, and how it's important to continue the work on ourselves in the way we've been taught before. And I found something spontaneously happening in me that I could hardly prevent, the sort of voice welling up in me and saying, no, 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 it's not like that anymore. We must simply just follow what we've received now. So that was something strange for me, because I had revered him and respected him. And for me to say that was altogether quite extraordinary. Possibly the fourth thing that I noticed was that something that I had been longing for in my adolescence and in my early 20s was to be able to experience life fresh again, like as a child, like as as one experienced this immediacy of life, particularly to smell, to hear, to feel, to see, in the same way. And that did actually, that happened. And I must say a lot of sort of the sexual problems of adolescence also seem to really settle themselves in that extraordinary year when Bapak came and lived one. There was a calmness and inner satisfaction. It was altogether quite extraordinary. And finally, I suppose the other interesting thing was that in my medical studies, I no longer wanted to follow kind of occult ways of medicine, or any occultism at all. Books on Rudolf Steiner, books on all kinds of occult ways of looking at medicine just went out the window. I didn't want to read them. And really all I wanted to do was to qualify and be a practical doctor. So a lot of things kind of sorted themselves out for me in this sort of first 3 years. There's an interesting thing, I mean, talking about sex again, most young people need to have some way of relieving their sexual tensions and so on. And I don't know how it was for other young people, but what happened to me simply was after every latihan at night, there would be a wet dream. And one sort of grew completely used to this. It was just, there was no need to relieve sexual tension in another way. Bapak stayed up in the west wing of Coombe Springs, and there were many, many people open then. I guess it was in June of that year, 57, May or June, that I was open. I think it must have been May the 27th.
What year, 57?
57. And many people came. There was going to be a seminar for the Gurdjieff method, and many, many people coming from all over the world. And Bennett was really excellent at this point in time in getting people to come into Subud. And there wasn't enough space in the dining room, and so in the garden at Coombe Springs, quite a big garden, they put up 3 big wooden sheds for latihan. And it's interesting, I think the building that we were making called the Jami Tunatra, which was a 7-sided building, had possibly not been completed at that time. I think that's why they had to put these buildings there. And there was, every evening, probably several hundred of people had to do their latihan. And the racket, the noise, was utterly indescribable. It seemed that these floors acted as a kind of sounding board, and Bapak placed the most active, called them O group, and people not only were sort of vibrating the boards, but people were going through the windows. Practically a window was broken every night. Some people seemed to roll up in the carpets and roll out the doors. It was quite an extraordinary thing. Then Bapak left, and he left behind an Indonesian from Sumatra called Cheifetz, whom I felt very close to, and another called Asikin, who was younger than him. Cheifetz was really his representative. And things then began to be a little difficult because Bennett lost his faith was beginning to lose his faith in the completeness of guidance in the latihan. He couldn't give up his role as a teacher. And Cheifetz felt equally certain that this couldn't be mixed with Subud. So there grew to be a little bit of a division at that point. It was a sorting out of one from another. And I remember seeing Bennett and suggesting, well, maybe we should carve Coombe Springs in 2. And Subud have one half and Gurdjieff method the other half. It was too simplistic to follow, I suppose. And of course it all ended up with him selling Coombe Springs in the end, starting off on his own.
This was a few years down the line.
Yes, it was a few years down there, but there seemed to be 1 year of what I would call almost paradise. It was Bapak and Ibu were living in Coombe Springs, people were coming. There was a change from the earnestness and what do you call it? Really, it's difficult to describe. The very earnest, serious, attitude of the work from Gojo, from the efforts to observe yourself, to be conscious of yourself, the efforts to work on yourself, and the efforts to, in every way, be serious, compared to the feeling of lightness and joy and laughter that came into the place when Bapak came. In fact, some people, I never experienced this, but some people heard an enormous explosion one night, really big, like almost like a clap of thunder when there was no thunder there. And Bapak heard it and said, this was actually the material forces actually meeting and kind of exploding in the place. Well then, I don't want to sort of go into all the details of my life.
Give us the highlights or any special kinds of experiences that you've had.
Yeah. In a way, I suppose I've had presentiments of the future all my life. I spoke about my father, and one of the interesting things in this is my father died when I was 12, and I was on a visit to my aunts in Scotland. My aunts lived in the Highlands, in a place called Pitlochry. And I was just passing through Edinburgh and was looking in a shop window in Princess Street. And a little old lady came up to me and said, you don't know, the English prep school boy is a very shy and embarrassed kind of child. And she came up to me and said, believe in Almighty God. That is the most important thing in your life. And something will happen to you, but be sure to remember that. And 2 to 3 days later, the telegram arrived of my father's death. And I forgot all about it. And I've told you what happened shortly after I was opened. And just one other experience that went with that. And I remember walking down one of the paths in Coombe Springs and suddenly realizing that it was true that I possessed a soul or an inner self. And I remember just jumping up and down saying, Eureka, Eureka, it's true, Anyhow, another experience that happened a bit later now, going forward a few years, to about 1966, and I'd been qualified for about 5 or 6 years. And I'd sort of completed a phase of my training as a doctor. I'd done a lot of jobs in hospital. I'd got my higher degree in medicine. And I was wondering what to do next. And I had a dream. And in this dream, I saw Bapak, and near a yellow taxi at the back of his house in Chalandak. I'd been out there and seen him before this, but in the dream there was a circle of people whom I knew who were already out at Chalandak. And they were around the car, and Bapak was putting his mother into this yellow taxi, and he was saying goodbye to her, and it was very kind of poignant goodbye. And he saw me and he beckoned to me to come through that crowd of people to help him put his mother into the car to say goodbye to her. And at that time I sort of interpreted the dream as my need to leave England and say goodbye to my own mother. That's how I interpreted it. Well, anyhow, by a series of different incidents and so on, I came to live in Chilanda and slowly sort of built up a practice as a doctor for the expatriate community and for the British Embassy and so on. And Bapak began to ask me to see various members of his family. And one was his mother, came to stay at that time from Samurai. And she's a very independent lady, very straight-backed, tall lady who was very dignified. And I saw for a few things about her eyes, about her knees and her arthritic knees. And I advised Bapak, I said, maybe for a while it'd be better if she didn't do the sola, because she should rest her knees and not bend down, And he said to her, well, Mother, you could do your prayers sitting down. And she looked at him and said, life's not worth living if you can't do the sola. So this is, and anyhow, the time came when she came to a serious illness. It was really a very serious illness. And she must have been, I don't know, into her 90s at that time, well into her 90s. And Bapak was very keen for her to stay and not to go. And he asked me to help and treat her and so on. But it was clear that A, she didn't want to stay, she wanted to go. And B, she wasn't going to accede to my methods of treatment, putting drips up in her body. She wouldn't eat, she wouldn't take any medicine. She tore any drips out that one put in her arm and so on. And well, I tried all kinds of ways to sort of keep her nourishment up. But as I say, she was quite determined to fast. And suddenly one evening, we all seemed drawn to her bedside. It's all the family, all Bapak's family, and Sharif and Rahana, my wife and myself. And I've never seen someone die in such a dignified and such a peaceful way. She really seemed to hand herself over almost consciously. And it was a very, very, very moving experience. And as this happened, I remember the dream. And that dream was almost 7 years before. And interestingly, that was the year in which yellow taxis came into Jakarta. And again, I don't know the significance of these dreams or how it is, it kind of like the dream life and the real life kind of intertwine. The dimension of time seems to have another dimension of eternity mixed in with it.
What was it like being Bapak's doctor?
Well, both wonderful and difficult at the same time. wonderful in that one was that one could be of service to him was a great great feeling of satisfaction. Even the smallest service filled one with a lot of satisfaction, because you felt that one had received not an enormous amount from him, not only spiritually, but in his simple graciousness to see one was comfortable in a material way. Like I can tell you later about making sure that one was comfortable in the house, or seeing one was comfortable by having land up in the mountains to have a sort of weekend home. But coming back to being his doctor, one was also became privy to the way that he faced difficulties, bodily difficulties and so on. Bapak always said that he was a man, as well as having been the first to receive the latihan Subud, but that he was also heir to all the difficulties of man, and he was. He had he had a heart attack. His first heart attack in about 1970-71, and one thing is that almost everyone that you see who has a heart attack, however much you see fear, you always see fear, because it's something threatening your life. But with Bapak, there's absolutely no fear at all. Not a trace that I could see or I could perceive at all. He seemed to say it was all the same to him if God took his life or let him continue. Second thing, he had mild diabetes, and then following on that was he had these cataracts, which were a problem for him. And after his heart attack, his heart enlarged enormously, and he was liable to heart failure. This is the thing that finally took him off with an attack of pneumonia. It was difficult in being a doctor. There is the element of being an advisor, being an educator, being a manager, there's all these sort of elements that come in that require you to have an element of authority. And really, one was aware of the greatness of Bapak's being and so on. There was no way that I felt I could exert authority with Bapak. And yet it was necessary. And finally, in his last heart attack, I advised strongly that in his first heart attack actually, I advised that he have a cardiologist, and he said, no, Rachman, you receive what to do, and Bapak will follow what you say. And in fact, for a short time, I was able to manage on that basis. But it was clear around about 1979 that he did really need a cardiologist. The type of condition that he had a very dangerous arrhythmia that in fact was not diagnosed properly until he got into hospital. it was assumed to be one kind of arrhythmia by both myself and 2 or 3 cardiologists that I showed the tracing to. And it was not really diagnosed until he got into hospital, where it was seen clearly that he needed urgent therapy. And it was during that time that a Chinese doctor, who wasn't the one who looked after him, but a friend of Dr. Willie's, had been to Holland and had been specially trained in a new technique for stopping arrhythmias. Usually you put the defibrillators on the chest, and it's quite a shocking procedure. And this was a very refined procedure where the electrodes are threaded up the veins right into the sinoatrial node, where the shock is given right on that point, so there's no pain at all. And Buffer's arrhythmia was reversed in that way, with him looking at the video screen, which showed the catheter coming up, and taking enormous interest in all that's happening to him, and in fact asking for a mirror so he could see what was going on. And the video screen going off and on, so it wasn't really properly under control, but this Chinese cardiologist was so well trained he could almost sort of do it by feel, you know. Yeah, that was basically it. I wouldn't dare order Buffer into hospital. I think I'd advised him or advised his wife, Ibu, to go into hospital. And Buffer very carefully told me that that was impossible. And I didn't sort of think to say this again, you know, Buffer should go into hospital. But when Willie came in and said, there's nothing you can do, you've got to go to hospital, he said, right, where's the car, let's go. And that was one of the important things to know, really, about Buffer. Nothing was ever fixed, or ever, you could never assume anything.
Do you have any interesting experiences, or hear of any interesting experiences surrounding Bapak while you were in Indonesia?
The trouble is, there are many one always tends to remember the things that pertain to oneself, really. It seems very selfish and egotistical of one, but the moments of being tested, moments when really Buffer's presence sort of impinged upon oneself most directly.
Yeah, one of those experiences.
Oh yeah, I mean there's so many, it's difficult to get it all down in one thing. I mean some are just very ordinary, everyday experiences to show how Buffer could be so responsive. For instance, when I first went there, we lived in a place called Skid Row, which was just a row of little rooms that were shoved up for the Tokyo Congress, I think in 66 or something, or 65. It had just been put up at very short notice to take a lot of guests that were coming after this Congress. So they were meant to be only temporary for a sort of year or so. In fact, they're still up there now. And we had 4 children at that time. 5 children, sorry. 5 children at that time. And we had 3 rooms in this place. quite small ones, and kind of long sitting room which divided into a small sitting area, a kitchen, and a bathroom area. So lots of people were sort of walking around with towels around their waist and so on. And by that time I started to build up my practice, and I had heads of company who would come down and consult me sometimes at weekend, and you'd be found with a bath towel around your waist or something like that. And the group there that were kind of organizing my presence there wanted to find me housing. And I'd already bought a little piece of land in the compound. And they had gathered the money together to build a house on that. And I wanted to go ahead, so when Bapak came, Bapak was sort of calling one members' houses then, and he was just sort of saying, well, how are you? Fine, but really would like to build a house. And he said, well, what's all the hurry? So I explained the situation about company directors and so on coming down to see one. And I said it wasn't very appropriate to receive them in this tiny little place. And I was feeling a little embarrassed saying this. Bapak immediately just, well, of course, come along, and paced out where the new guest houses would be. And then said, right here, here's where your house will be, and planted his heel in the ground under a tree there, and that's where the house was built, in the garden there.
Is that a different place than what you'd already bought?
No. He more or less, bought 1,000 meters of ground, and that's where it is now. And so the house was built. It took about 6 months, I think, to build, and then there was Salamatan, and Ibu helped to, in fact, arrange the whole Salamatan for the house. So it's a rather special place for us still. Well, there's many sort of intimate details of one's life. Bapak came down one Sunday to our house and sort of knocked on the door and walked in. Sunday was sometimes time, sort of sleeping in late, and he said sort of cooey, sort of like that, And Rahana said, oh, who's down there? Who's down there? And she sort of shoved on clothes and rushed downstairs and found Bapak there, of course. He was delighted, and Bapak sat down. And then I cannot remember whether this was one situation or two situations, but two things came out of this. One was a conversation with Rahana, which sort of turned into a question of, are you having more children? And more or less it came, and she was very aware as she spoke that if God wills you to have more children, you'll have more children. And it kind of dispelled a fear in her. And I can't remember how long that was before Ramadan, because at the end of Ramadan, just at the last day of Ramadan, there was always a large feast, breaking a fast, and it was always done around and in Bapak's house. And then Bapak would often give a talk, a really marvelous talk on that last day. And everyone would be sitting around, either on chairs or on the floor. And I remember being only about a few meters from him and him looking around at me and saying, Rachman, don't be afraid to have more children. And my last child was conceived almost exactly 1 year after that event. Anyhow, there was a kind of these extraordinary kind of things happening, like I asked Bapak the question whether I could work in Indonesia when I first went there. And he'd say, no, not now, but in 1 year's time. And again, the job started, and almost exactly to the day, 1 year later. I think we actually could go on almost all night talking about. In the early days when we were there, as you probably know, it was shortly after the fall of Sukarno and the events of 30S, which is the 30th of September 1965, and the 6 generals were kidnapped by the communists and murdered. And following this was previous to that, and following it was a very disturbed time. And it was a habit of everyone to do jagamalam, or to guard all night, which became both a sort of physical security thing and a spiritual event. And Bapak used to stay up with us all till about 3 o'clock in the morning, talking. And these were very sort of blissful times for everyone. But I think what Bapak became very aware of, it became a kind of experience in itself, and didn't lead to people doing the things that he was advising them to do. So almost in a constant state of kind of latihan. But the leading into the world and doing things in one's life was not happening enough. Anyhow, for one reason or another, whether it was that or whether it was the last illness of Ibu, after Ibu's death, which I think was in 1971, he only did this about twice a month on Fridays, and he'd stay out with the helpers, again testing with them. And many things he tested. And there were many experiences that went at that time with people. But alongside these sort of experiences with Bapak was the first kind of efforts of getting things done, certain projects done, the building of the Latihan Hall, building of various people's homes around the Latihan Hall, the starting of certain enterprises, the sugar factory enterprise that failed in the end, but the starting of the farm up in Cheifetz. There was quite a lot that was beginning to be active in the material sense. I can't remember when the first ideas were that of the... Well, the first course of the active thing was the bank, the beginning of the bank. And through to 79, 80, also was a tremendous sense of development of enterprise and so on in materials. And
you eventually left Indonesia.
mm-hmm.
Do you have any particular reason, or just?
Yeah. First, in a sense, I think a lot of things that I was unaware of eventually caught up with me. I had not been successful in, at first, getting good relations between myself and Indonesian specialists. I'd had 4 or 5 really bad setbacks with patients who I had disagreed with the management by specialists. And instead of persisting in that, I formed a different route, and I sent people to Singapore, where there was a very efficient system of receiving patients. And they felt better, and I felt better. And this went on for quite a long time, but unbeknown to me, this was considered a great insult to my Indonesian colleagues, who had a bit more political power than I realized. And my clinic, my practice grew to quite a big extent. I eventually had about 162 companies whose employees I was looking after. And the medical officer of health, in fact, asked me to refer more patients to Indonesian specialists. And I was a rather stubborn, obstinate person. I just said, well, look, I've taken the Hippocratic Oath, which is do the best for my patients, and I'm afraid I'll continue to do that. And so to do it, of course, and according to what my opinion was, things were in fact improving, as many young Indonesian doctors had studied abroad and come back and handling expatriate patients with considerable skill, as they do now. And the need for myself as a doctor, of course, was consequently not so great. So when we had to move to larger premises, and in fact we moved in and did everything, but it did require registration. And finally the registration sort of went up and up. Instead of being settled on a low level, it went right up more or less to the Ministry of Health themselves. And they gave me a year to hand over everything to Indonesian staff and then move out. And during that time I tried to get Indonesian citizenship, as a matter of fact. And I was given a lot of help by the Ministry of Justice, and they gave me in fact a permanent visa to stay there, which I've since lost because you have to go every year to, and I missed it by a week or two due to my own stupidity. And but I think there was something in me that felt I needed to move on to and do something else.
Yeah.
I think it's something, initially, people felt there was something in Subud that was connected with Indonesian culture that everyone should kind of know about. But I think since most people have realized that interesting and deep and fine that Indonesian and particularly Javanese culture may be, it's for the Javanese. It's not, everyone has to discover their own culture. And it's not absolutely, it's not necessary for people in Subud to know about Javanese culture. It's interesting and they can learn something, but it's not essential. What is essential is for us to know our own culture and to be able to relate and feel one with those of other cultures.
Do you have anything else that you'd like to add or any other thoughts?
No, only that there's one experience I would like to relate, which was round about 1972, when Bapak was going on a trip. Professor Hazarian, who was a Subud member there and a professor of Islamic law, asked a somewhat outrageously non-Indonesian type question, which to Bapak was, what would happen to Subud if when Bapak died and if Bapak died? And as I say, if you know the Indonesians, this is the most unusual question for an Indonesian to ask. But Bapak didn't blink an eyelid, of course, and he asked his mana to get up and test this question. And her testing of that, my interpretation, and I believe probably everyone else's interpretation because it was so clear, was that Bapak would enter into everyone and everyone. And really, my experience since Bapak's death, and particularly in this Congress, has really, for me, confirmed the truth of that. Lots of people have worried and thought that Subud would die, or Subud would not grow, or Subud would shrivel up and so on when Bapak died. In a way, I think, and this is something I think many of us have experienced actually, Subud in a way seems almost deeper in us now. Bapa's advice to us to stand on our own 2 feet is gradually becoming a reality. And I can really only express my gratitude to Almighty God for being able to be near Bapa in his lifetime. And to beam of whatever service I could be. And my regrets are only that I couldn't have done what I had to do better. That's all.
Thank you very much.
I don't know who will look at this or what it will be. It's just a kind of record of one Subud member's experience of life. And meeting with Bapak and so on.
It's an accumulation.
I think everyone should get down. I mean, of course, there's many experiences that I've left out and so on. And, these don't matter. Just get down some of the things. I think we need all to be a witness, as Helena was saying today, that we need to be a witness of many of the things that have happened. One doesn't always need the extraordinary type of experience, but sometimes the small experience that actually begins to enlighten something in your life. I remember one Ramadan, Bapak asking for people's experience, and this same Professor Hazarian talking about meeting the four horsemen of the apocalypse and so on and so on and so forth. And Baba saying, yeah, And what else? Who else has got some experiences? So I had an experience of just walking at night and feeling this extraordinary kind of joy and happiness in walking. This delight in the simple thing of walking. Normally walking is just to go from here to here, but this was a real delight. So get up and show us then. So I got up and I was unable to experience, of course, the sense of joy. The Papa, he said, yeah. That's actually your legs doing the zikr. And after that Ramadan, I had to go to New Zealand to fulfill a promise I'd made to do a locum. This is before my job started in Indonesia. And as I was walking to the plane, suddenly I felt it in my legs. La ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah. It was just, that prayer was coming out of my legs, and the same joy in walking, and the same kind of thing was there. And I've experienced it from time to time in my life since then, but this Congress, it's come out again. Every time I'm walking from Wentworth to here and back. That's why I said to Rana, look, I'm not going to a bus, I just like walking. There's many little experiences like this, people can tell you about, and I think there must be thousands and thousands and thousands. Baba took an interest in practically everything that you did, and you didn't realize this fatherly care. You still kind of felt some kind of reserves sometimes about him, because of your awareness of his greatness and the kind of awe. It always made you astonishing that, for instance, when my practice started, he came round and looked at the little clinic that had been prepared. He stood on the scales and he wandered around, and just like your father and mother, and he sort of came. It's just it's incredible, really. The everyday sort of care and love that he showed for all the members living in China. Anyhow, I'm going to stop now.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Good. Okay, thank you, Sam.
It has one bad feature, and that is that
Palestinians and Israelis, and above all represents not only a gigantic step taken by Palestinians who are, of course, the aggrieved party, the victims of this, that this possessed, but also it's a step that foresees a time when two peoples who have fought bitterly throughout the whole of this century can live together in a peaceful and productive way.
Professor Said, may I go back to my question for a moment? Was the recognition of Israel by endorsing UN Resolution 242 implicit or explicit?
Well, you know, I need only repeat that what we're talking about is the presence of two states in Palestine, one Jewish and one Palestinian. And so, you know, it seems to me that the important thing is that two states are recognized here, a Palestinian and an Israeli state.
I wanted to ask you whether or not, in your opinion, the PNC steps today were taken in an effort to open direct talks with the United States.
Well, I think obviously that's something of great importance and significance. But the main purpose of this was to crown the uprising, the intifada that's been taking place on the West Bank and Gaza since about a year ago. And it's certainly been part of the discussion. I mean, everybody knows that conditions, the international conditions as well as U.S. conditions, for discussions between Palestinians and the United States is acceptance of 242 and 338. And tonight, those were made absolutely clear and unequivocally, and that these should be the basis of a peace conference between Israel, the Palestinians, and all the states concerned.
Professor Said, would you also please stand by for a moment? Later in this broadcast, we'll talk to Moshe Arad, Israel's ambassador to the United States. But first, when we return, former United Nations Ambassador Jean Kirkpatrick will join our discussion.
This is ABC News Nightline, brought to you by Apple Computer.
It was a great show.
Oh, it's the best. When do you do again?
The doctor says the 10th, but somehow I think I'll be early.
So, who's taking your place on the Gale Harbor project, huh?
No one. There goes that piece of business.
No. Who's going to coordinate Houston and Chicago?
Me, I'll be back to work in a week.
What? You're out of your mind? I thought you said you were going to take 3 months off.
I am.
You think you can run a $10 million account from the nursery?
No. I think I'll do it from the den.
You want to drive to the sun with the most features under the sun, but you don't want to pay a price.